FFBR Live, podcast extension of Final Fight Bible Radio. It is Friday, February 13th, 2026. I am Matt Crane, station manager of this Christian radio ministry. And today, I am going to build upon the episode from last week, except this time we will be looking at the baffling correlations between ancient mythology and the future prophecy of the book of Revelation. So strap in, folks, because today's episode is going to be epic. All right, glad you could be with us this week, and just want to say that the chat room is open, so please feel free to post any questions or comments there in the chat, whether it's on the app, the Final Fight Bible Radio app, or the YouTube live stream, which is live streaming as we speak at YouTube, Final Fight Bible Radio. All right, and want to say just a couple quick announcements. I've been making some improvements to the premium players. You might have noticed that if you're a premium subscriber. We have 5 additional streams: the preaching stream, teaching stream, scripture stream, music-only stream, and youth kids stream, in addition to the regular Final Fight Bible Radio stream. All of those are available on premium, and I've made some improvements to the players. Now, right now, you might not be thinking those are much of improvements. They've had a couple little glitches. However, they're getting a little bit better every week, and part of the reason why I made those adjustments is because essentially having the players rebuilt. My son is in college right now, and he's learning to be a computer engineer, and so he's learning coding, and he actually did the coding for those players. But what that does is essentially allows me to detach from a broadcasting company, which is charging an arm and a leg for those streams, and having the new coding for those streams, putting those new streams on premium. That's saving me over $200 a month. So that's kind of a big deal. Also, it makes it very easy to implement additional streams. I had a request recently, or a what would I call it? A feedback of having a instrumental only stream. So people maybe who are working or just reading, or you like having peaceful, calming instrumental music in the background of Christian songs or hymns. An instrumental-only stream, and that is very, very easy to do with the way these new streams are set up. So also the content can have a lot more content, not as much repetition. It's just going to be better all around. So you probably noticed that. Just want to let you know that's what's going on there. Let me know send me an email or shoot me a text or whatever if they're having issues, or if you notice the players aren't working right. That kind of feedback is always helpful. And then also want to say that the Collision Conference is March 5th through the 8th in Palmetto, Florida. And more info is on the Final Fight Bible Radio website under the Promotions tab, as well as the links and dates for the New York City Manhattan Street Preaching event, and also the New Orleans Street Preaching event. You can find the information and the registration there on the website. And want to say, speaking of Blitz, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of get right into things this morning. I have a lot of material to cover, but this last week I was thinking about the lesson that I taught last Friday about is mythology repeating itself, and some of the things that are going on in politics right now. And speaking of the New Orleans street preaching event, is called the New Orleans Street Blitz, and that word Blitz is a word that comes from Blitzkrieg. It's German, and it means lightning war. Blitzkrieg is a lightning bolt, lightning war. And so I was thinking about this lesson that I did last Friday, and if mythology is repeating itself right now with the whole Trump presidency, it's, as everybody knows, and if you've been paying any attention to the news and things that are going on in this country, it's with the release of these Epstein files and all the criminal implications in there. And I'll just say it right now, I don't think that Trump is criminally implicated in that. Now, you can disagree with me if you want, but that's a whole nother conversation for another time. But there are a lot of people who absolutely are criminally implicated for the things that they were doing to children. And in addition to that, you have all this fraud coming out in Minnesota. You have all this information coming out about the stolen election. You have all this information coming out about Crossfire Hurricane and the Obama administration targeting President Trump and spying on his campaign, all of which is completely illegal. And it's like the Trump administration is holding the power to destroy the deep state. They have all the information they need. It's like he's holding the lightning bolt and he just needs to let it loose. He just needs to let it go. But for the life of me, I cannot figure out why. What is the holdup? And the thing is, President Trump, he promised that he was going to break the deep state. He said that in his speeches prior to coming into this administration, and he said he's going to drain the swamp. And I get that maybe it's not quite as easy as he hoped. However, it's like he holds the power in his hand of justice. He has all the evidence. What more evidence does anybody need with all the election machines and all the things that we're finding out about how the election machines manipulated the vote and everything that's been going on and all the money laundering that's been coming through Venezuela and all the crimes being revealed through the Epstein files? How much more information needs to come out before somebody is going to be brought to justice? And the thing is, he better do it fast, because the American people are losing confidence in the president. A lot of people came out and voted for President Trump in the last election thinking that this was going to be the presidency that brings about justice to the wicked. But all the president keeps talking about is the economy this and the economy that and how many billions of dollars he's making with tariffs, and all. That's all fine, that's all good. I'm all for trying to fix the economy, sure. But none of it matters if the wicked are not brought to justice. Because as soon as his presidency is over, if the wicked aren't brought to justice, they'll just steal another election, and that'll be the end of it. All right, so something needs to happen quick. And it's like President Trump has everything he needs to destroy the deep state. He holds the lightning bolt of justice. He just needs to use it. And it's so frustrating to see him not using it. It kind of reminds me of that scene, from the Lord of the Rings, where, let's see if I can get this to pull up. Hang on. Yeah, here we go. It's like he's got the ring. He's about to drop it in the fires of Mount Doom and just end the corruption and the wickedness in the world. And it's like, just do it. Throw the lightning bolt. Use it. Push the button. Flip the switch. Destroy the deep state. Use the lightning bolt of justice and bring this thing to an end. It's like victory is in his grasp. And like I said, it's like Frodo holding that ring over Mount Doom. And Trump is just standing there, making Americans wonder if he's having second thoughts about destroying the deep state. It's like, come on. Throw the ring. What's going on? Get rid of it.
Destroy it!
Just throw it in.
Go on! No! Throw it in the fire! Just let it go!
Just let it go. But you know what happened.
The ring is mine.
The ring is mine. So hopefully that's not going to happen. Hopefully that's not going to be the end of this administration. But we'll see what happens. So America is like so close to victory. And like I said, I've been thinking about this all week. But you know what? Time is running out. The midterms are coming up. And I'm not going to be political this whole episode. I'm just wrapping some things up from the last one. So if you completely disagree with me, that's totally fine. Just indulge me for a minute, one more minute. Time is running out. These midterms are coming up. Americans are not excited about MAGA right now. And the question is, will Trump use the mighty thunderbolt of justice? I hope so, but I guess time will tell. And so, historically speaking, Cyrus had his Darius, had his military man to overthrow Babylon. As a matter of fact, the overthrow of Babylon in the Old Testament wasn't necessarily by Cyrus himself. It's debatable whether he was even there at that battle. The one who overthrew and took over Babylon on behalf of King Cyrus was Gobrias, who is known as Darius in Daniel chapter 5. That's the Darius that you read about. And he was the military commander of Cyrus. The Lord Jesus Christ has his Michael the Archangel. And so maybe Donald Trump, a type of Cyrus and all that, is like, he needs his warrior. Who's his warrior? Who's going to be the one who takes down the Babylon, who takes down the deep state? Maybe it'll have to be someone like, maybe Donald Trump needs his own Michael Flynn. He would be great. Why doesn't he put Michael Flynn in charge? This thing would be over. So anyway, interestingly, one more thing. I tried to find out the time of year because what we're talking about here is Jupiter, Zeus, striking with the lightning bolt, the serpent dragon Typhon before it destroys the earth. It's one mighty blast from Jupiter, and then finally there's peace and stability in the world. And that's kind of where we're at in the pattern of history. And I tried to find out what time of year ancient cultures celebrated Jupiter's destruction of Typhon, and I couldn't really find that information. It doesn't seem like that's necessarily spelled out, at least from what I've been able to find. But ancient Rome did have a celebration on the Ides of March. Ides means middle. So in the middle of March, March 15th, was the date for settling all debts. You might say it was a date of justice being served, order being restored. And it was a sacred day for the god Jupiter in the Roman culture, but no one seems to really know why that particular day was sacred to the god Jupiter. But the thing is, there's a lot of evidence that points to the Exodus of the Bible correlating with this Jupiter versus Typhon event. And if that does match, if those two events do match, then we know what time of year the Exodus was. It was Abib 14, the Passover, which is between March and April on our calendars. It can be anywhere from March to April. Okay, so if it was, let's say, mid-March at the time that happened in history, you would have Passover occurring and the death of the firstborn and the Red Sea parting and all that, all those things happening right around the middle of March, which historically, according to other cultures, it sounds like that Jupiter versus Typhon event was going on at the same time, and that astronomical cataclysm could have something to do with the plagues of the Exodus, because other cultures record that they are having similar issues in their cities. It's not to take away from the power of God in the Exodus or anything like that. Obviously, Moses raised his staff and things happened like that. So obviously there was some miraculous divine things taking place. Nevertheless, like I said last week, God often uses nature to accomplish his purposes. All right, so it could be two things going on at the same time. And whereas the Bible records the things from this standpoint of Egypt and the Jews and the things God was doing through Moses, other cultures nearby, seeing this cataclysmic cometary event, all they saw was just this horrific vision of the sky and going on in the skies. All right, so it's interesting that if all these data points align, Jupiter zapped Typhon in mid-March. The heads of Leviathan, you might say, were broken in pieces in mid-March, as it says there in Psalm 74:14, referring to the Exodus. So maybe, hopefully, what I'm getting at is if history is going to repeat itself, and if the pattern is rigid, which patterns usually aren't, but if the pattern is rigid, if Trump follows the pattern of history and uses the blinding light of justice and judgment to destroy the deep state, I would imagine it would take place in mid-March if it was going to happen. It better happen soon. Otherwise, they're going to lose the midterms, and Trump is going to end up, and they'll lose the House, lose the Senate, and you can know for sure that Trump is going to be impeached and probably put in prison, and that's the end of it. So he better do something. Throw the lightning bolt. Throw the lightning bolt. Trump, throw the lightning bolt. Just do it. Destroy them. All right. Let's go ahead and go to break, and when we come back, we'll get into the actual Bible study. For those of you that are sick of the politics, stay tuned.
When nature's walls surround me, the hills of green around me, my place in all creation seems so small.
February is the time of year that most people associate with love. And so this month on Final Fight Bible Radio, we want to focus on the biblical subject of love. The Bible says in 2 Corinthians 9:7, God loveth a cheerful giver. The context gives two conditions for the charitable giving of money. However, all kinds of giving still invokes these conditions. The first condition is that of liberty. Every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give. The second condition fosters a byproduct of liberty that God loves, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. This love is not God's love expressed to a lost world by Jesus Christ, nor is it the love God the Father has for all his children. This love is specific to a cheerful giver. A cheerful giver naturally has joy and faith, for joy must have the presence of love, and giving the presence of faith. The Bible does not say God loveth a giver, because God cares less about what you give and more about how you give it. Giving grudgingly or of necessity are not cheerful actions, no matter how much you pretend to smile. God knows, and what he knows is all that matters. If you are a Christian who cheerfully gives, rest assured that God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love. But would God be righteous to forget uncheerful giving? What if, over time, your labor of love simply lost its luster? What you had once purposed in your heart by liberty somehow got snared into a performance of will by obligation. You might well consider whether your adversary, the devil, has subverted your liberty so that it lacks the luster and beauty and naturalness and vibrancy that it once had. You see, a cheerful giver has consistent access to something that an unhappy giver only has sporadic access to, incidentally as it were, and that is the unspeakable gift. In light of the cheerful giver, 2 Corinthians 9:8 states that God is able to make all grace abound towards you, not just some, that ye, always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work, being enriched in everything to all bountifulness, which causeth through us thanksgiving to God. Did you notice the movement in those words? The redounding, the ripples, the cheerfulness? God desires to make all grace abound towards you, not just to you, but towards you, a wider radius affecting others. As Paul writes, quote, who long after you for the exceeding grace of God in you. Thanks be to God for his unspeakable gift. Not incidental, not accidental, but natural emanating grace. Cheerful givers and uncheerful givers alike give, but only the cheerful one has consistent access to this unspeakable gift, which makes all the difference. But the most precious, enduring, and foundational aspect of this reciprocal gift, the very root of it, is love. This month, consider the cheerful givers in your life, and be God-like in your love, for God loveth a cheerful giver.
So I went a little bit long on that political tirade there. So anyway, thank you for indulging me. Now let's get into the Bible study. All right, so last week, like I said, I introduced the hypothesis that that maybe you'll find is a little bit of a stretch, and that's fine, you know, comparing ancient mythology to politics. But I mean, honestly, I'm only speculating. I'm only giving my opinion, and I could be wrong. I'm totally fine with that. I've been wrong before. All right, but regardless of whatever you believe about the origins of mythology and where you think these stories came from and how, the indisputable facts before all of our faces is that, number one, all ancient cultures had their own mythology. All of them do. Number two, ancient cultures prior to the Grecian culture took mythology seriously and regarded it as history not fables. All right? The Grecian culture, as we know it, is actually, we think of ancient Greece, but actually it's not as ancient as some of these other cultures. They're actually pretty infant in terms of ancient cultures. In fact, in Plato's Timaeus, he tells this story. I think it's his uncle Solon is going into Egypt, and he's talking to these Egyptian priests. And Solon, the Greek, he starts talking about ancient Greek history and things like that. And the Egyptian priest kind of laughs at him, and he says, "Solon, you Greeks are ever children, and an old man that is a Grecian, there is none." And so Solon is asking, what are you talking about? And he says, "You guys are all young in your souls, for you have not in them, because of old tradition, any ancient belief or knowledge that is hoary with time." And he says, "And the reason is this, many and manifold are the destructions of mankind that have been and shall be." The Egyptian priest said there's been many destructions of mankind within human memory. He says the greatest are by fire and water, but besides these there are lesser ones in countless other fashions. He says, "For indeed that tale that is also told among you, how that Phaeton, the child of the sun, yoked his father's chariot, and for that he could not drive in his father's path, he burnt up all things upon earth, and himself was smitten by a thunderbolt and slain." He says, you guys know that story, you Greeks tell that story. He says, this story, as it is told, has the fashion of a fable. You guys think it's just a fable, just Greek mythology, just some imaginary archetype of some philosophy and all this. No, he says, but the truth of it is a derivation of the bodies that move round the earth in the heavens, whereby comes at long intervals of a time a destruction with much fire of the things that are upon the earth. He says, what you guys think is just some made-up story is actually something that happened in the cosmos that nearly destroyed the earth. That story of Phaeton. That story of Phaeton being hit by the thunderbolt is the same story as Typhon being hit by the thunderbolt. That's what makes mythology kind of difficult, is there's so many names, but a lot of times the names are describing the same characters. So it's like all these various names, but when you boil it all down, there's only 10 major characters, and they have 50 different names each. So anyway, he says the reason why your culture doesn't remember the ancient times is because your culture isn't that old. Because when that Typhon event happened, it flooded out the Egyptian mainland, and Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha, I think it was, were the only survivors. And basically Greek culture had to reset around the time of the Exodus. If the Typhon event matches the Exodus event, which there is a lot of things to indicate that it does. So anyway, the Egyptian culture is much older than the Greek culture, and you find that information there in Plato's Timaeus. All right, but ancient cultures had mythologies that are remarkably similar. Oh, I need to change this. Ancient cultures had mythologies that are remarkably similar, and they're so similar, it's beyond coincidence that all these different cultures could have the same exact stories. And the great dilemma of historians is how to explain that correlation. And from all the research that I've done, I personally am convinced that ancient mythologies are a crude and perhaps feeble attempt to make sense of things that were happening in the heavens above their heads. Now, that position checks a lot of boxes and answers a lot of things, but if that's correct, then that means that, number one, mythology is essentially astronomy, a caricature of astronomy. Like I said last week, when you go to the fair and you have your picture drawn by somebody there at the fair and they draw you just this massive head, it's a caricature. It's not a perfect representation, but there is enough correlation to tell that it's a picture of you. All right, so mythology is a caricature of ancient astronomy. Number two, mythology, stripped of all its embellishments, then would be history, ancient history. All right, and specifically, the history of instances when things in heaven interacted with the earth, specifically comets and near-Earth orbit comets. All right, and then number three, God is the author of history, absolutely, and so the events that happen, and all of the events that happen in it, okay, and God, and especially cosmic events. Anything that's cosmic in nature is going to have the fingerprints of God all over it. And then number 4, God always has purpose in the things that he does. So anything he was doing up in the heavens, it wasn't just random. It wasn't for no reason. There was a purpose behind it. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in a little bit. And number 5, God has ordained that history rotates like a wheel, resulting in similar repetitive patterns. As you remember, the Bible says in Ecclesiastes 1:9, the thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. There is no new thing under the sun. God has ordained that history go in patterns. So if mythology is ancient astronomical history, then we should not be surprised to see the same patterns in the mythology narrative that we find throughout the Bible narrative, because we're dealing with a cyclical pattern. Okay? So if ancient astronomy or ancient mythology is caricaturized astronomy, the fundamental roots stories, the lowest common denominator of mythological stories should follow a similar pattern to the narrative and the stories we find in the Bible, and even in prophecy. Because, again, it's a cyclical pattern. All right? So the general pattern always repeats. And the pattern that I want to focus on today is the sequence of mythology's major events compared to the sequence of the book of Revelation's major events. So recall from last week the 3 major events of mythology. All right? You have, number 1, the reign of Saturn, or Kronos, and he is supposed to be the original god. He is the creator with his wife Rhea. During his reign, it was a golden age, but over time, he became corrupt, he became a tyrant, he became a dark god, and he ended up eating his children. And speaking of eating children, again, I can't help but go to these Epstein files and these revelations that are coming out with everything going on and all this information. Did you hear this stuff about the beef jerky and this coded references to eating children? You say that's absurd. There's no way that's what they're talking about. I wouldn't be so sure. Those Satanists, those Saturn worshipers, those Satanists, they're all about cannibalism. They're all about child sacrifice. They always have been. Baalite religion, which is Saturnian religion, has always been about destroying children. Why? Because Saturn, Kronos, in ancient times, ate his own children. The god did it, so they're going to do it. All right? That's how they mimic the god. That's how ancient idolatry works. And so you have this video. I don't know if you've seen this. I'll just kind of show it here in the background. But you have this lady. I don't know if you've seen this. She's like freaking out about they're eating children. No, that's not the one I want. Yeah, there we go. I'll post this link in the show notes. But this is a video, I think, from 2019, and there had been a party, and then she comes out, and she was just having a meltdown, and maybe she's on drugs, maybe she's high on crack, and just having a freak out. Not really sure, but she's out there screaming to the people that these elites that she was at this party with, they're eating humans at the party. And she's just like having a meltdown. She's freaking out. I don't know if you've seen that video, but that's what's going on. And you say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, it has to do with Saturn. It has to do with all of this Saturn worship, Satanism. That's where Satanism traces back to, is Saturn. All right? So you have this thing where Saturn eats his own children, and that ends up being the beginning of the end of the Saturnian reign, because here comes Jupiter, here comes Zeus, the bringer of justice and judgment, and he casts down Kronos, and while Kronos is cast down, you have Ishtar, or Venus, lamenting in the skies, crying over the dismemberment of Saturn, or Nimrod, or Osiris. But eventually what ends up happening is, so now Jupiter's in charge, but then Saturn returns. He rises from the dead, thanks to the help of Venus. Venus, the goddess, went and helped bring back Horus, which is Saturn 2.0, and then what follows is this conflict between Jupiter and Saturn, the conflict between Set and Horus, okay? And I went into that last week, and then eventually what ends up happening is Jupiter casts out Horus. So first Saturn was cast down, then he's cast out into outer darkness and becomes the Dark Lord of the underworld. He just departs. And now Jupiter is in charge. But before he can really bring about the make the universe great again, you have this situation where Typhon, the great red dragon comet, ends up threatening all life on Earth and threatens the heavens. As a matter of fact, there's a weird connection between this comet Typhon and Venus, and Velikovsky in his book Worlds in Collision really emphasized that, and some people have an issue with that, whether or not this comet had anything to do with the planet Venus, or Typhon had anything to do with the planet Venus, or was just a gigantic comet that had crossed the Earth's path, is debatable. But nevertheless, something was going on in the heavens, and it threatened the Earth. As a matter of fact, in Hesiod's Theogony, I'll read it for you. Basically, Tartarus, the darkness, delivered her last-born child, Typhon, a god whose hands were like engines of war. And it says, let me pull it up here. Oh, that's a little bright. Can't even read it. Well, forget that. I'll just keep reading it anyway. This god whose hands were like engines of war, whose feet never gave out, from whose shoulders grew 100 heads of a frightful dragon, flickering dusty tongues, and the hollow eye sockets in the eerie heads sent out fiery rays, and each head burned with flame as it glared. And there were voices in each of these frightful heads, a phantasmagoria of unspeakable sound. All right, so this is the description of Typhon, the comet, the dragon comet that threatened Jupiter in the universe. All right, and it said sometimes there were sounds of spirited bulls bellowing and snorting. There were sounds of shameless roars of a lion, or like birds chirping. It was an uncanny noise, or a whistle hissing through the long ridges and hills. You say, well, what is this? This is Hesiod's retelling of the Typhon event. Basically, this story is also amazingly recorded in the Kolbrin text, and it's called the 3 chapters of the Destroyer, the Doom Shape. And there's a story, essentially, if you can imagine being in it on Earth. Now, you don't have to take this interpretation. This is just from what I've read, studied and researched. But essentially, there were people on the ground seeing this massive comet in the sky, and it was affecting the Earth's magnetic fields. It was causing earthquakes. It was causing all this turbulent weather, and it was causing electrical sparks. And they were looking up at this horrific sight of this massive comet in the sky, and the flames coming off the comet looked like heads of a dragon, essentially. And all this crazy stuff was happening, and people thought it was the end of the world. Naturally, you would. We can't even fathom anything like that, because when we think of a shooting star, we just see this little zip in the sky, and that's the end of it. But could you imagine if a comet came close to the Earth? I don't know how close it would have to come, but it'd be something, let's say a comet took up, 1/5 of the sky. I mean, that would be pretty scary. And so that's what they're basically describing. And there's this noise. They're describing the noise. And it says, and that day would have been beyond hope of help. And Typhon would have ruled over immortals and men had the father, Jupiter, not been quick to notice. He thundered hard, and the earth all around rumbled horribly. The wide heaven above, the sea, the ocean, and underground Tartarus. Great Olympus trembled under the deathless feet of Jupiter as he rose. And Gaia, the earth, groaned. The heat generated by these two beings, Jupiter and Typhon, scorching winds from Zeus's lightning bolts, and the monster's fire enveloped the violet or red sea. The sea turned red. Earth, sea, and sky were a seething mass, and long tidal waves from the immortals' impact pounded the beaches, and quaking arose that would not stop. When Zeus's temper had peaked, he seized his weapons, searing bolts of thunder and lightning, and as he leaped from Olympus, struck. He burned all the eerie heads of the frightful monster, and when he had beaten it down, he whipped it until it reeled off maimed, and vast earth groaned. And a firestorm from the thunder-stricken Lord spread through the dark, rugged glens of the mountain, and a blast of hot vapor melted the earth like tin, and so the earth melted in the incandescent flame, and in anger Zeus hurled Typhon into Tartarus's pit. All right? Very interesting. So Zeus, or Jupiter, blasts the serpent with a mighty lightning bolt, bringing Typhon's reign of terror to an end. And Jupiter then restores order and justice to the cosmos, and eventually he yields the authority and rulership of the heavens to Helios, the sun, and Jupiter departs. Now, you might be thinking, what a ridiculous, stupid story. Well, not so fast. This ancient Greek, Roman, Sumerian, Akkadian, Indian, Chinese, Assyrian, Babylonian mythology is a lot more similar to Hebrew prophecy than you might think. Stay tuned, we'll get into it after the break.
Awesome, magnificent, all-sufficient God, eternal Redeemer, through His precious blood.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt Crane, president of Final Fight Bible Radio, and author of several books pertaining to in-depth Bible prophecy. I would like to invite you to a national 4-day conference on apologetics, prophecy, and current events called Collision. It's all hosted by the Soul Trap and will be taking place March 5th through the 8th. I will be one of the guest speakers at Collision, and I will be sharing with you a biblical template that will help you to discern, navigate, and maintain a proper balance in these confusing, challenging, and ever-changing times. For more information, visit thesoultrap.com. So, as far as the time of the end is concerned, it really all kicks off with the rapture. And as most of you know, my interpretation, my belief is that it's going to be the rapture of the church, and then there are 7 years of the beginning of sorrows, followed by 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation, for a 10.5 year end time total. And then there's going to be the second advent of Jesus, the 1,000-year millennium, and then you have the battle of Gog and Magog, the Great White Throne Judgment, and then the new heavens and the new earth. Now, we know that the outstanding characteristic of the time of the end is that the Antichrist, and he will be spotted right before the rapture. That's 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And it's one of those things where it's, remember the Where's Waldo books? It's like you finally find Waldo. And you're like, there he is. And then your parents are like, oh, we got to go somewhere. And you have to set down the book and leave. It's kind of like that. The church is finally going to recognize who the Antichrist is. And as soon as, I don't know how much time is going to pass, but evidently very quickly after the Antichrist is identified by the body of Christ, the rapture is going to happen and we'll be out of here. All right. But the initial manifestation of the Antichrist is that he is the man of sin, right? And some say, well, he's the man of lawlessness. And that's not necessarily wrong. I mean, the New Bibles change it to man of lawlessness, and it's kind of a similar deal. It's not necessarily wrong, but they shouldn't be changing the Bible text. I would leave the Bible text alone. Just leave it as it is. Nevertheless, that is along the lines of what he's doing. He's lawless. He's transgressing. He's wicked. Nevertheless, the Antichrist, according to the book of Revelation chapter 6, he's evidently going to be a notable ruler. He goes forth conquering and to conquer, riding on that white horse at the beginning of the end times. He's got a crown, and so evidently it indicates that he's a ruler of some sort, and he's evil. He's characterized by sin, transgression, lawlessness, if you will. And he's also a conqueror, Revelation 6:2, which it insinuates military conflict, devouring with the sword, all of which matches Saturn's reign. So you say, well, what are you doing? Now I'm starting to take you through Bible prophecy, and I'm showing you how the mythology sequence, interestingly, matches the sequence of Bible prophecy. All right, so by the way, as I've mentioned, there's an etymological connection between Satan and Saturn. And as I've taught for many years, the initial years of the beginning of sorrows, when the Antichrist first comes on the scene, is going to be a time of great prosperity, right around the time of a golden age, as I've told you. As I predict The end of the church age is going to be essentially a golden age as far as the world is concerned. And as the church is raptured, that golden age is going to persist into the beginning years of the end times, the beginning years of the tribulation period, which explains why the Jews, when they're being witnessed to and preached to by the 144,000, they reject the message because they have so many goods and houses and they're marrying and giving in marriage and everything's great. It's because it starts as a golden age, the golden age of the Antichrist, the golden age of Saturn. So what happens to this tyrant, this Antichrist, who apparently has Jewish ethnicity, but he devours with the sword his own people, evidently, just as Saturn devoured 3 of his own sons, according to the mythology. The Antichrist, prior to the start of the Great Tribulation, during the beginning of sorrows, is going to be responsible, evidently, for the death of 1/3 of his own people. Revelation chapter 12, verse 4. So what happens? Well, that evil tyrant, the man of sin, he is killed, right? He is cast down, as it says there in Revelation 12, verse 10. Michael and his angels cast down the dragon, and he's cast down to the earth. And the Antichrist, as the man, the physical man on the ground, he's assassinated. Revelation 13:3, he has a head wound as unto death, right? And the whole world marvels, right? And Zechariah 11:17 talks about the sword being upon his arm and his right eye, okay? And so the Antichrist dies. I would imagine that the man of sin is going to be dead for 3 days and 3 nights, if I had to guess. And I think that's a pretty accurate guess, if I had to guess. 3 days and 3 nights, while Mystery Babylon, while his city, his kingdom, Egypt, Cairo, New Cairo, I think, Mystery Babylon will be lamenting his death, just like Isis, just like Venus, just like Semiramis, just like Rhea. All right? And a Jew is evidently responsible for the death and the assassination of the Antichrist. I mean, after all, he did stand in the holy place, declare himself to be God, and then he's slain. I think a Jew would be pretty upset if they finally got their own temple and now this person defiles the holy place. All right, so he's assassinated by a Jew, by all indications in the Bible. And so it stands to reason that when he rises from the dead, the Jews are marked for annihilation when Saturn comes back from Tartarus. So then you have this thing where Saturn rises from the dead. The Antichrist rises from the dead, and he's a little bit different now. He's Saturn 2.0. He's Horus. He's not Osiris anymore. He's Horus. He's risen from the dead, and he's got this new vitality, this new vigor, and he immediately declares war on Jupiter. He declares war on Jupiter, and, it's kind of an interesting thing. He declares war on Jupiter, the Jews. I don't know if there's any significance to that at all. It might just be an interesting coincidence. But the Antichrist declares war on the Jews. Jupiter actually did the world a favor by killing Saturn and casting down the Dark Lord. However, the Egyptians in the world, they hate Jupiter. As a matter of fact, most of the cultures of the world regard Jupiter as the hero, regard Zeus as the hero who cast down the evil Kronos. But the culture that doesn't see it that way? Egypt. The Egyptians. They loved Ra. They loved Osiris. They loved Osiris, and they hated Set, Jupiter, for destroying their Osiris. They hated Jupiter. Everyone else loved him. The Egyptians hated him. Very interesting. The Egyptians. All right, now according to the pattern of mythology, what follows is years of conflict between Horus and Set, between Saturn and Jupiter, between the Antichrist as the son of perdition and the Jews. According to the Bible, there's 3.5 years of this warfare between the Antichrist and the Jews, the Great Tribulation. In spite of the Antichrist's fierce persecution, the Jewish saints, the Bible says, overcome him by the blood of the Lamb. and a remnant manages to survive until the final battle of Armageddon. And this is interesting. Like, it's only 10:46, and I'm actually getting through all my notes. It's amazing. All right, so I actually might finish on time today. That blows me away. Okay, so what you have here is, like I said, in spite of the Antichrist's fierce persecution of the Jewish people, the Jupiters, let's just say, in this conflict that lasts for 3.5 years, the Jews survive, and a remnant survives until the final battle. All right, so now we're tracing this mythology. You have evil Saturn during the Golden Age. He's cast down, but then he rises from the dead and declares war on the one that cast him down. All right, and then there's this conflict between Saturn and Jupiter that takes place for several years, and then finally Saturn is cast out. All right, and you have then this final battle right around. Saturn is cast out, but around this time, the final battle with Typhon appears. Okay, and so you have this final battle with the great serpent dragon Typhon, whose other identity in mythology is Phaeton. And Phaeton in Greek is a word that means light, or it's a reference to a star of light, or a chariot of light. Or perhaps you could say he's the bearer of light, or the light bearer, or Lucifer, right? Interestingly, Hesiod describes Typhon as being a serpent of Tartarus, the underworld of darkness, and he describes Typhon as a multi-headed dragon serpent. And I was actually just reading in the Golden Bow, which is a huge volume of ancient mythology. I was reading it yesterday and this morning, and there's this interesting correlation between Typhon and the color red of all colors. You say, where are you going with this, Brother Crane? Well, what I'm getting at is this description of the great red dragon in the heavens who fights Jesus at the second advent is similar to the story of mythology back around 1400 BC. Typhon was a red serpent dragon in the heavens with multiple heads who threatened the destruction of the entire earth. And he was red. Interestingly, the whole sacrifice of the red heifer is connected to the casting down, which was the sacrifice of the red heifer was instituted right after the Exodus. And in typology, it's connected to the Exodus and evidently connected to Typhon. You say, well, how does the red heifer that the Jews sacrifice have anything to do with Typhon? Well, the Egyptians also started sacrificing red heifers to mimic the destruction of the red cow, the red beast, by the god Jupiter. You say, well, don't the Egyptians hate Jupiter? They do, but later on down the road, they ended up conflating Jupiter with Osiris, and they ended up calling Jupiter Osiris, and then all of a sudden they liked him again. And Typhon became the bad guy. Anyway, it's a long story, but the Egyptians were also sacrificing red heifers. And according to them, it was to commemorate this Typhon event. Kind of interesting. Now you say, well, why would God copy what the Egyptians were doing? Why would Moses copy what the Egyptians were doing? God wasn't copying what the Egyptians were doing. There was something that took place in the heavens, and the Egyptians interpreted it one way, but God was depicting it in another way. Prophetically, it typifies the ultimate destruction of Satan at the hands of Jesus Christ way off in the future. Anyway, the great red dragon, this prince of the power of the air, Typhon, is wreaking havoc on the earth and destroying the earth. That's ancient mythology, but that's also future prophecy. The Bible says in Revelation 11:18 that Jesus Christ is going to destroy them that destroy the earth. And so basically the Antichrist, the son of perdition, is destroying God's people, destroying the earth, until, as it says on line 860 of Hesiod's Theogony, when Zeus's temper had peaked, he seized his weapons, searing bolts of thunder and lightning, as he leaped from Olympus, struck. He burned all the several eerie heads of the frightful monster. You say, Brother Crane, are you saying that Jesus, or that Zeus is Jesus? No, I'm saying that the planet Jupiter was called Zeus by the Greeks, and in ancient times, God was moving planets and comets around in such a way that the heavens declared the glory of God, and day unto day uttered speech, and night unto night showed knowledge. And their line is gone unto the end of all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In other words, God was using the heavens as the scriptures before the Bible scriptures ever began to be written. And he was depicting the events of the book of Revelation 1,500 years before John was ever born. You say, that's quite a stretch. It's actually not really when you understand that God works in patterns. You see, at that time, God ordained Jupiter, the king of the planets that God had created. He ordained Jupiter to be a type of the future King Jesus returning at the second advent. You say, well, I thought Jupiter was the one-eyed giant depicting the Antichrist. No, that's a wrong typology. That's not what God was depicting. That's a misinterpretation of the heavenly scriptures. Because the thing is, Jupiter, as all cultures knew him to be, was the bringer of justice and judgment and law and order. He wasn't the lawless one. Saturn was the lawless one. Saturn was the celebration of Saturnalia and the upside-down inversion of all things. Jupiter was the one that brought law and order. Jupiter is not a type of the Antichrist. The great and mighty Jupiter destroys Typhon. Now, what does he destroy Typhon with? He destroys the Typhon red serpent dragon monster of the skies with many heads, the Leviathan of the red Leviathan of the heavens. He destroys him with a thunderbolt. What's a thunderbolt? Well, it's a sound combined with fiery light, is it not? The ancients regarded cosmic thunder as the speech of the gods. They regarded cosmic thunder as the speech of the gods. Now, again, this is something that we can't really wrap our minds around, but ancient mythology records interplanetary electrical arcing. Could you imagine that? An interplanetary electrical arc? As a matter of fact, if you want to see some really interesting studies, check out the Thunderbolts Project YouTube channel. And what's interesting is there are several craters on the moon and craters on the Earth, but they never seem to find the comets that supposedly caused these craters. And these craters don't look and act or appear the way that they should if an actual rock fell from the heaven and smashed onto the Earth. You say, well, what are these craters then? Well, what's interesting is they can reproduce in a lab these exact same craters using electrical arcing. When you have an electrical arc hitting a spot, it leaves this particular formation of a crater that matches the craters on the moon and the craters on Earth. Way more so than comets. I'm not saying that comets never hit the moon or comets have never hit the Earth. But what I am saying is that most of the craters that you see on Mars, Earth, and the moon can be reproduced in a laboratory with electrical arcing, which is exactly what the ancients talked about. As a matter of fact, that big scar across the center of Mars, if you'll look up the Mars Valerianus, or whatever that giant canyon is called that's like 3 times bigger than the Grand Canyon, that has all the telltale signs of electrical scarring. Otherwise, there's no plate tectonics that cause that thing. That has all the telltale signs of electrical arc scarring of electricity. So anyway, this super interesting story and super interesting information that seems to corroborate what the ancients were saying. They said the gods threw lightning bolts at each other. Interplanetary electrical arcing, because our universe is electric. All right? So anyway, when Jesus comes down, does he not come with a sharp sword that comes out of his mouth, like speech? And is not the sword of the Lord a fiery sword, according to Genesis 3:24? And when God speaks, is it not like thunder? Jesus speaks, a sword comes out of his mouth. What kind of sword is it? Like an iron sword? No, it's a fiery sword that comes out of his mouth. Speech, sound, and light. Isn't a projectile sword also called an arrow, according to Job 24 and 25? And are not the arrows of God specifically called lightning in Psalms 18, verse 14? So Jesus returns at the second advent and blasts Satan, blasts the Antichrist with a thunderbolt of cosmic proportions. The sword that goes out of his mouth, a sword is a metaphor for lightning in the Bible. It's a metaphor for an arrow. It's a metaphor for a fiery dart. It's a metaphor for lightning. In the Bible, lightning is synonymous with fire oftentimes in the Bible. Very interesting. So Jesus returns and blasts Satan with a thunderbolt at the second advent. Now, isn't that what Jupiter did according to Hesiod's document written in 800 BC? I mean, isn't that what happened to Phaeton according to Ovid's Metamorphoses written in the 1st century AD? Isn't that what Marduk did to the serpent Tiamat in the Sumerian Enuma Elish written in 1100 BC? I mean, isn't that what Indra did to Vitra according to the Hindu Rig Veda written around 1400 BC? I mean, isn't that the exact same story of what Liang Bang did to the white serpent according to legends told during the Chinese Han Dynasty? I mean, that sounds almost exactly the same as what Raiden, the Japanese thunder god, did to Raijin, the thunder beast, according to Japanese mythology. And isn't that what Norse mythology says in regards to Thor, the god of thunder with his lightning hammer? Isn't he destined to slay Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, during the final battle of Ragnarok? How peculiar. It's as if all the nations knew from way back in the beginning what was going to happen in the end. How did they know that? I wonder who could have communicated such information to them. I wonder how that information could have been communicated to them, because they all write it. And consequently, Bible rejectors say that John and Daniel, these prophets, they're just copying what other cultures wrote about, and they're just giving it a Jehovah twist. No. That's not what's happening. All these cultures did write these stories, but the prophets of God, they did not copy these stories. They were writing accurate prophecy, but it's interesting that these stories and prophecy match. Why? Because there's truth to these mythological stories. There was something that God was demonstrating in the heavens before the scriptures were written, because the heavens were his scriptures before the word of God was penned. And what he was communicating in the heavens was the same truth that he communicates in this book. It's just that a lot of ancient cultures misinterpreted a lot of what he had to say. Just like a lot of cultures today misinterpret what God has to say. You know, when it comes to this ancient mythology and how they knew all this stuff, maybe it's not that hard to figure out if you're willing to think outside of the box just a little bit. And if God causes history to repeat on a pattern, like on a wheel, and we know that the things prophesied to happen in the future have a matching pattern in the past, then we can also know that when the final events of Armageddon unfold, according to Ecclesiastes 1:9, it will still be true what was written in Ecclesiastes 1:9, there is no new thing under the sun. I hope you enjoyed the Bible study. Have a good week. See you next time.
Who has numbered every grain of sand? Kings and nations tremble at his voice. All creation rises to rejoice. Behold our God, seated on his throne. Come, let us adore.